Okay, we are live. Hello from Melbourne and Spain all at once. Today we have a very special episode because we have a very special guest, Rebekah Wilson, joining us all the way from Barcelona in Spain. And we are going to talk a little bit about networked music collaboration and remote music collaboration. What a perfect time to talk about that, because where I am, which is in Victoria in Australia, we just entered a snap lockdown due to a new outbreak of COVID-19. So we are all locked in again, only limited amount of kilometers can be traveled from home, and people have only the ability to leave their houses for a few selected reasons. So, what better time to talk about remote music collaboration than this? So, Rebekah, how is it going in Spain, in Barcelona?
So I'm moving between Spain and the Netherlands. Actually live in Amsterdam. I just happen to be in Spain right now. So one of the nice things about this remote collaboration is that you can travel and work from wherever the internet is good enough. So yeah, here in Spain, they've just opened the borders, which is great. So I can be here. In the Netherlands, yeah, it's still, challenges in Europe getting vaccinations, but it seems to be positive, definitely much more positive than it was a few months ago. So it's very good. Many more people are now moving around, and especially the composers that I know. One of the difficulties, of course, for musicians and composers was not being able to travel for rehearsals for ensemble performance, and so it's really great that that's sort of coming back.
Okay, so it sounds like Europe is a lot more mobile in terms of human mobility, and also there is a lot more normal life happening there, whereas Australia is still fairly isolated from the rest of the world. I think only special reasons allow people to jump on the plane and come in or out.
Mm.
Um, so that's very interesting to hear in the context of our interview or conversation today. Um, it's really I'm very excited that we can have this conversation, because both you and I come from very similar research backgrounds. We both are very interested in online music collaboration. I think the difference is that myself, I have started more interested in the networked studio based space and virtual studio based collaboration, whereas your journey into this was, as far as I know, more about networked live performance.
Mhm.
Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I do, do track-based work as well, but it's certainly very insignificant part of my practice. Any preparation I might do in a studio would tend to be, editing or mastering a recording that was done live over the internet.
And that kind of work you probably do in a less collaborative way, more asynchronous way, I would imagine. Is that right? Like the mastering or mixing type of projects.
Of course, yeah, that
Mm.
would be asynchronous, and then you would use, the various tools that we have that the file sharing and transferring, and any way that you can get files to people non-real time, which is, actively what I'm working to make easier, to be able to work in real time in those processes as well. So it's been something we can talk about. In addition to the music performance, there's also the review and approval process, or the collaboration process, of which having a live component is really important to me. Something I like to remind us as musicians, as creators of sound and of media, there's nothing more special than that moment that you first share something with somebody and they're listening or watching, and you see on their face that first moment that they hear or see something, that reaction, and you want that. You don't get that with file-based collaboration when you're not in the same room, but we can with live collaboration. So that's really what interests me.
Yeah, there is that similarity, you're right, between real like live performance being in the same room and virtual based or networked performance when you do have a lot of interaction, just I guess a different type of interaction, or perhaps facilitated in different ways through technology, but still it's very interactive. And I think perhaps people who never tried networked live performance might not realize that interactivity is still at the heart of what's happening between a group of musicians. Rebekah, what I would love to know at the start of this chat is, what was your journey into the world of networked collaboration? How did you start exploring this field?
It really goes back a long time when I first started working on the internet in the 90s. Very immediately wanting to work with sound and video, to collaborate remotely. Growing up in New Zealand, you're now living in Australia, but you are from Europe originally.
From Poland,
I assume.
yes.
Poland. So, Poland to me is very close to every other country in Europe. With a few hours on the train, and you're in Paris or Berlin. Not the same where Australasia is. The Oceania. That's not the case. So, if you want to collaborate culturally, back then. It was a lot of effort, a lot of distance traveling, a lot of money, a lot of planning. Certainly not something that a lot of artists could do. Us being traditionally not a wealthy bunch, and so international flights constantly required grants, applying for grants. I mean, how many of us as artists are spending most of our time thinking about grant writing more than actually doing the work itself. So that's just one of the reasons why the internet to me was such a marvelous invention. It was like finally I could have access to the world. And I'm curious too, Martin, if it's one reason that remote collaboration has become so important to you because of your geography.
It's a great point, because I always thought that was one of the biggest benefits of engaging in that area of music work, overcoming so many limitations. Firstly, the limitation of geography, but secondly, just the pure limitation of how many musicians we can know in our little locality. Even if I lived in a 5.5 million city of Melbourne, I still could only know a limited amount of people that I have, crossed paths with. So there is always that limitation, which networked music collaboration allows us to overcome. And I think that was definitely part of that. For me, I was always fascinated with the technology, how this kind of magic can happen, that it allows to bring people or musicians together into one creative project. And I think now, in a post-COVID world, it's easy to take it for granted that this is how we operate, that everything is so easily done over the internet. But my journey dates back to around 2011, 2012, when it comes to exploring that field. And back then, I think it was primarily a fascination with what the technology can facilitate. And secondly, as you said, similar reason, which is finding new musicians. So for me, it was always important to do creative crowdsourcing, meaning finding new people that I would have not met in any other contexts otherwise. But sounds like that you recognize this opportunity very early on. Sounds like it was back in the late 90s, which was probably when we had a lot less technology supporting that process, I would imagine.
Yeah. The first like streaming that I did was when I was at STIME in like 2001, 2002. And there was an initial interest to just do concert streaming. You know, you could use QuickTime, but of course, just the complexity of setting up a live stream wasn't really being paid off in terms of the audience. Nobody, you know, unlike now, really wanted to sit at home and listen to music when they weren't there. I think that part of the culture hadn't really started developing yet. So it was just early experiments that didn't really go anywhere. But then after I left STIME and I started Source Elements, and this was absolutely towards using that sort of streaming technology, but to seek to get it extremely low latency. This was before Skype existed. It was really just a hunch at the time that we had, like this whole internet thing. You know, I'm sure it's good enough to replace what at the time was a very expensive technology, ISDN. So a lot of studios, and they still use it, but less and less, would install a copper line into their houses, the same kind of copper lines that we had in the 20th century, and use that with a digital router to be able to set up a point-to-point call to somebody else, similarly with a copper line and the same kind of hardware. My gosh, if you're looking back at it now, it's like, how did we support that? But that was just what was possible back then. So if you wanted to make an ISDN call, you couldn't go to your vacation house. You couldn't go stay at your friend's house. You know, you couldn't go to a hotel. You had to go somewhere else that also had an ISDN line. And not only that, the same compatible hardware. You know, it was like, imagine having an iPhone and not being able to call an Android phone. It was like it's like you have to carry on both. So there was a huge opportunity at that time for disruption, which we took advantage of just as people were starting to get broadband in their houses, and just as studios were starting to, you know, get T1 lines were really becoming popular. So it was just at that moment, you know, that always that combination of luck and hard work that I really found myself in the world of streaming, and it makes me very happy. I'm extremely happy in this world. It satisfies all my needs.
And you became a pioneer not only when it comes to uh, using those technologies as a musician, but also because you have started the company called Source Elements, which provides nowadays a lot of uh, collaborative technologies to musicians. So I would love to also hear that part of your story about how Source Elements has been started by you, and yeah, just the beginning of that process, whether it was uh, difficult or easy, or how did you put those pieces together?
Like all good ideas, it started over a beer in a nice warm summer afternoon with my business partner. We were friends back then. He'd mastered one of my CDs back in the 90s, and just randomly sitting around having a chat. And he works in a studio where he was using the ISD, and I hadn't really had much to do with ISDN at that time. So the conversation was something like, he asked me, do you think the internet could do what ISDN does? Because we're spending so much money, you know, per month on this. And I was like, sure, why not? Having absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. And then we went to a studio so he could show me the hardware and show how it works. And we did a test connection. And then we go out for dinner and we come back the next day. And it's like, oh no, we left the ISDN box on. It was still connected.
Mm-hmm.
That single mistake was $700 phone bill.
Wow.
That hit me home. It was like, oh my God, like just because we forgot to disconnect a phone call for a high-end phone call box, this is a $700 bill, which is, you know, our fault and so that was really the momentum that pushed me forward, seeing that there was a need for this, and also again to go back to geography. ISDN was very expensive in New Zealand and Australia. If you wanted to work with someone in LA while you were in Auckland, you're spending $5 a minute. A minute.
Wow.
It's just unbelievable, for
Yeah.
a digital call. So again, fueled by that geography, by that need to connect, knowing, I was on my way back to New Zealand to live, and it was like, okay, if I want to be there, I need to find a way of making this whole internet thing work for me in this as well. So they really uh, and without that need and that drive, I think it would have been a lot harder for us, because I just remember those first days, that first couple of years while we were building it and testing it and getting all the bugs out and making it stable. It was I woke up every day so excited that we were doing something important to me and to others.
And how long did it take to release a first product publicly so other musicians could use it?
Uh, From the first conversation that we'd had, it was in like August 2003, and we released in March 2005.
Okay, so a year
So
and a
there's a lot of,
half. Mm,
yeah, it's about normal for a new, a completely
mhm.
new product. Yeah. And then
And
since then, we've just been iterating on it.
so that product, could you just maybe explain what was the first product that was released? Was it a plugin or was it,
Sure.
yeah, some
Well,
other type
the
of
beautiful
technology?
irony now is we see so many, the last year has been an incredible explosion of
Mm,
other people coming into this space and doing it as well. And that very first plugin we made, which was a very, very high quality audio, that was it's all about the timing as well. So it's very important that you don't have dropouts, you don't have time stretching, you don't have artifacts. The audio is also, it's very, very good always. I mean, that was a difficult thing for us to do in the early days when the internet wasn't so good. But it was, just audio to audio, but it was a Pro Tools plugin. So you just drop it in your Pro Tools session, and you could connect to any other Pro Tools session in the world, and suddenly you've got a live audio link that was record quality, that was good enough to go straight into your broadcast media.
mhm. Which was so ahead of time because nowadays we still see plugins like that being released by new companies. And it seems
Yeah.
to me like last year, finally, many people had no choice but start using them
Mm.
in so many contexts, educational, but also professional. Music groups had to collaborate remotely. And it sounds like you already had that technology in place from 2005, which is way ahead of the curve. So that shows how groundbreaking was your thinking and what you offered to the world at the time. And of course, as you said, you were just modifying that concept over the next few years. But I understand that now Source Elements offers a broad range of options to choose from, and they can benefit not only live performers but also studio-based collaborators.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we've,
Mm,
in these last 15, gosh, going on 20 years now, we've added to the functionality, new features, new applications. We do everything. It's a complete suite, from time synchronization, remote timelines for ADR. We've got a great new product coming out that's an accompaniment to Source Connect for remote ADR. We've got routing apps, because often, for example, right now I'm using one of our software, Source Nexus, because later on I want to show you a presentation. I need to get
mhm,
audio in there while I'm using my microphone. So I use Source Nexus to do all the routing so that, I can have multiple applications coming in. And gosh, we do live video streaming, and now very high quality, low latency video streaming. Gosh, got lots of little file transfers. One that you might be interested, it's a little concept where, say, if you want to send someone a WAV file, so this is a 1 hour WAV file that's like, what, 1.5 gig file. And if you want to send it faster, you can't really compress it, because zip compression doesn't work on audio. So we have an application that will compress it into lossless, so it will half the size, and then so the time to compress it and transfer it is less than sending your WAV file. So this is actually very popular in the Middle East. I'm not quite sure why. I
Wow.
don't know why, but the Middle East loves this.
So
So I think it might be the bandwidth.
what kind of applications? I mean, I don't know if you have that kind of data, but when you say it's popular in one region, do you know what kind of applications those users are
Broadcast. Yeah,
broadcast?
the
Okay,
TV stations and broadcast. Yeah.
because that's another interesting thing that your technologies were not all only targeting music users, but also broadcast companies and post-production houses. So I think that was an important part of your uh, approach, and your clients came from those backgrounds as well, not necessarily being
Mm.
musicians.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I'd say, largely at the beginning, it was a challenge for musicians to embrace, and I really don't think that started happening until the last year. I would say, I think remote music performance, network music performance, aside from using it for session musicians, which is a different thing. Overdubbing
Mhm.
is another
Yeah.
type of application that we support. That the actual performing of musicians together wasn't happening on any scale prior to the pandemic. So that's
Yeah.
been really interesting for me to watch this happening and people interested in it. It's been incredible. So to me, there are two sort of distinct ways of using the internet for music collaboration, and one is more there's others, but for me, because you've got 3 or 4 of them, but mine are real-time music for review and approval or overdubbing, which is where one person, say the central studio, has the material, everything's sort of maintained there. They have their Pro Tools or Nuendo session set up, and then they say need to either record an overdub of a voice, of a vocal, or a guitar or drums, and then but everything comes back into that central place. Or they need to send a live mix to the producer or director or client to get approval. So that's one way that we work, and that's been our traditional sort of product base. The other way of working, which has been my research that I've been doing aside from source elements, but using the knowledge of the technology, because I'm also a composer. I studied composition in the University of Victoria in Wellington in New Zealand, very traditional composition, ensemble, instrumental composition, and then electroacoustics. That side of using network music for actual performance is a completely different beast. They don't overlap. They overlap in many ways, but the way you use it is very different. The way you think about it is very different. The tools have to be very different. And interestingly, those tools for network music performance happen to be right now really served well by the open source community. So, for example,
Mm.
Jamulus and Jack Trip, SoundJack, these are fantastic. I've actually got a talk in about 2 hours at the Audio Engineering Society just on this
Mhm.
topic. And I'll send a link. I'll put a link here when it's live, when the video is out. But so in terms of my research, that's informed by my understanding of the technology that we use for production, but the application of it for musician performance is quite different from the work that I do at Source Elements. So they're starting to merge. I think over time they'll merge.
Yeah, and just what I'm quite interested to also find out, when you talk about the approval process, when you have multiple people involved in in a project, how many nodes would you say are typically involved? So how many uh, different geographical locations might be involved in that kind of connection, where say you might have a voiceover artist, a director, and perhaps some musicians. Would you say that it's typically more than two locations that connect
Oh
for
yeah,
that process? Yeah.
yeah. I mean, obviously at least two. It's not
Yeah, exactly.
remote.
Yeah, yeah.
And
But often it's more complex than that. Is that right?
mm, yeah, well, one example is we worked with an orchestra last year we wanted to make a bumper for our
Hmm.
videos for YouTube, and we had this luckily invitation to work with the Synchron Stage Orchestra in Vienna
Hmm.
to do this. And it was like, okay, well, the middle of the pandemic, I was thinking the countryside of Portugal at the time. It's like can't go to Vienna today to,
Hmm.
work with the music director in front of the orchestra. So we had what is now a product, Source Live, was in development. So we put this into practice. And we had the conductor in Vienna in front of the orchestra, and then the orchestra performing to the microphones, and they're just listening to the conductor. But we had a live feed to the conductor. Then we had the music director was in Dusseldorf. The composer was in Chicago. The recording engineer was in a different studio in Chicago. Actually, no, they were in the same studio. They put on masks and went to the same studio. I was in Country House in Portugal. My assistant was in Barcelona. And so, oh, and then the ADR recordist who had to be there for a review was in London. So that's seven, maybe more than seven, I'm not counting.
Wow.
But that was
Yeah.
just a typical session.
Mm.
It's very typical today that this happens.
Yeah.
So we're seeing with Source Live, which is used by a lot of orchestras, so you can hear and see the orchestra in real time with synced up with the film and film quality. 10, 15 people in a session who need to be there, who are important to, to take notes or advise, to, be proxies. So that's important. Yeah,
And that
this is day to day.
and I know that process was filmed and it's available on YouTube as a
Super
promotional
fun.
trailer video, which
Yeah.
reveals a lot of the uh, the scope of this project, which was quite ambitious in many ways, not just because it was
Yes.
so many people, but also
And we were
the
building the software
orchestra.
at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
And the software is now publicly available.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Great. And you've mentioned that your musical interests eventually steered your work towards more performance oriented online music collaboration. And I know that apart from being a composer and a musician, you also are teaching a very interesting course on networked music performance. So it would be great to hear more about that side of your work as well.
Yeah. Um, I think that the trajectory of like my interest in music, I started playing the piano when I was young, so Bach and Beethoven and Mozart are important parts of who I am. And then when I started composing, and as a teenager, I learned about 20th century music, and then became interested in new forms of music composition. And then through university, got interested in electroacoustics. And then I was lucky after that to land at Stein, which was completely amazing to find out like all the work that I've been doing in the studio, so sitting down with a Pro Tools session and is putting pieces together and forming a sort of a tape piece, as they would call it. Stein was like, yes, but we'll do it live. It was insane. Like the first piece that I heard that inspired me to get into this was Kath Matthews, who's an extraordinary musician, and she was playing. She had a theremin on the table and just a laptop that was running Lisa, which was an amazing piece of software written by Frank Balday. And she would make a piece of sound come out of the theremin, go into a microphone, and then with Lisa would start doing live sampling. And over the course of, I don't know, it was half an hour, 40 minutes, created this extraordinary sound world that I had never experienced before. This live electroacoustic composition, live electronics, what it's become. Kath is certainly one of the great pioneers of that. And I think many of us fell in love with working this way. Computers, as they became powerful enough, started just allowing us to do things that you couldn't do with live instruments, or sampling, or reprocessing, or synthesis, all the forms of synthesis that are possible as well. This beautiful mix now that we have, this super incredible, healthy state of music now, is such a combination of all the possibilities. And so well, I went back to do my master's in network music performance in 2016. I don't remember exactly why. I can't pinpoint the reason. The moment I had, I was like, oh, I should do that. I can't remember, so it must have just been a very organic thing. Then I went to work with Michael Norris as my supervisor at the University of Victoria in Wellington, because he's also a software developer and very talented technical person, as well as also being a very good composer. So it was a great for me to be able to work with him. And sat down and I said, what is it about the internet that's unique? What are the affordances, the constraints, doing a deep research? What is it about music that when you put these things together with these constraints of the internet, what can we do with it? What happens? And so I was so blessed to have this 2 years where I just got to fully engage in thinking about this. And so that got to where I met a lot of other wonderful people in the field, also studying this: Miriam Iworth, Sarah Weaver, Chris Chafe, got so many names. And then before the pandemic, I'd already been invited to teach at the Royal Conservatory, and I had suggested this topic of network music and had done a workshop 2 weeks before the pandemic, the world went in lockdown, like super timing. It was so great because then the students went and took what we'd learned in the class and were able to do their spring festival concert for their exams. It was fantastic. It just was a very rewarding experience to be able to have known that I could contribute to their completing their work.
So that's a fascinating course, because it is potentially the only one in the world which focuses on networked music performance.
I think Stanford has one as well.
Right. Okay. So, but it's still a rarity. And when your students engage in collaborative work, do they collaborate with people in different cities or countries? What would their network consist of in terms of the remote network of musicians?
For the students?
For the students, yes, when they
Yes.
work on various concepts with you.
Well, the last year, of course, has been very separated. So we've all been working from our homes and inviting other musicians to come in that they may wish to work with. We've got a concert, our final NDV concert, coming up in mid-June. And so in the rehearsals we're doing right now, everyone's like, sometimes we'll meet at the conservatory, but a few of us are allowed in a room at once at the moment. But then taking advantage of being able to say, oh, I want to work with my friend who plays the trumpet, and she's not in The Hague right now, so we can bring her in and she can come and perform with us. And it's really wonderful to be able to offer this opportunity to the students to say, at this important part of their education, don't be limited by geography. Again, this comes down to that for me.
Well, in a way, they are being trained to, embrace the lockdowns and anything related that the future might bring, and hopefully be ready to continue working on music projects regardless of limitations such as travel or not being able to meet each other.
Hope
Sometimes,
so.
and before the pandemic, people still had those limitations because sometimes the budget would not allow to fly
Exactly.
over. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so it is a
Yeah.
critical skill set and a very useful technology, regardless whether we have a pandemic or not.
Yeah.
And maybe going now back to your own practice as a composer and a musician who works with networked performance. Um, what are you working on currently? What are you exploring?
Unfortunately, as a musician, I've zero time this year. The pandemic was like, hey, how about you focus every ounce of your waking energy, of which there's less sleep now and more waking, to making source elements ready for post-pandemic world. But what I have has the opportunity to do is to work with others. So we just finished a really amazing project with the working with the New Institute in Amsterdam, who were uh, developing a project for the Venice Biennale of the Architecture Pavilion for the Dutch Architecture Pavilion. So we would have outside of pandemic circumstances, had these musicians be in Venice and have rehearsed together and put together a performance. So obviously, we couldn't do that this year. We did everything online, and so we found three musicians who were very, very talented. Are very talented. A tabla player from India, India and Uganda, African funk musician from Angola who lives in Lisbon, and a classical pianist and improviser and very, very talented modern pianist in Rotterdam. And we put them together with a software that was not really low latency, not like you're getting some of these hardware low latency options now from like Elk Audio, but low latency like this, conversational latency, we could call it, and spent time together just to say, hey, if I play this and you play with me, how does this work? How will I synchronize with you? When do I know that you're ready to move to the next thing? If I want to change chords, how will you know that we're going to do this together? And just developed a language. They developed a language between them that was extraordinary. It just happened because they wanted to play together, because they very quickly respected each other as musicians. And now we have this beautiful hour-long recording. Um, it's amazing. It's to me, it's like an entire new genre of music. And what's interesting about it, I love the fascinating thing, and I wish I had been able to be there to record it in each location, because there were four performances happening at the same time. Each of them were hearing something different, and yet each of them were making it work. This is very special.
Yeah, well, I was fortunate enough because I saw an unofficial recording of that you shared with me, and I admired their musicianship, and also it was great to see a very kind of traditional approach to arranging music with a percussive element, with guitars and vocals, all being implemented successfully. Um, I have played with various performative technologies last year during the pandemic on a few occasions publicly, and I know that there is a mindset adjustment that some musicians need to undertake in order to feel comfortable um, with that kind of approach to playing. But I was also fascinated by watching the discussion between the musicians in a short interlude, because it was revealing about their mindsets and how they have adapted to that challenge quite quickly, probably drawing on their strong musicianship and being able to again respond in real time to any musical challenges by doing what musicians tend to do on a regular basis. So that was a very good testament to that technology being very useful to musicians. And did you want to say a few more things, Rebecca, about how you perceive the inner workings of music performance over the network? Any types of observations that you have developed over the years.
Could I show the presentation that I have
Yeah,
prepared? Because that
that
would
would be.
cover everything, and
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
work through it quickly. It's one of those things I could spend an
Hmm.
hour talking about it, but I'll just compress it down into like 10 minutes, or we'll
Hmm.
stop and go through it together and ask questions, and then
Yeah.
yeah, I think that covers everything. So I've just got it ready here.
Also, on the topic of questions, for people who are watching this live, we are happy to see your questions. In the chat room. So feel free to type them up, and we will try to address them as we go. Okay, I will now add your presentation to the
Great.
stream. So here it is.
Okay, fantastic.
We can make it a
So
bit
let me
bigger,
just,
perhaps like this.
yeah, good.
Mhm.
Right. So I just need to now, let's see. I'm just screen sharing on another computer, so I'm going to make this super tiny. Okay,
Mhm.
great.
It looks
So
good
we can
here.
see that.
Yep.
Great. So yeah, just my starting of as a musician, as a composer, my musicianship, New Zealand and Stein were most influential for me. And then of course my time at Source Elements, focusing on the remote recording software. And one of the things that's really important for me in this aspect is that recording software, as you know, has very strict requirements of fidelity. In terms of if I record something and I'm going to be using that in media, so in a film or a broadcast or a song, it has to be bit perfect. It can't be any glitches or dropouts. So that was really the focus of Source Elements for many years, to perfect that, and all of the other various things that comes with that. Those things about fidelity, about bit fidelity, are not really so much a requirement for music, because it's not so much a concern of like, oh, maybe I heard a dropout. Who cares? We keep playing. You probably don't even hear it anyway when there's more than one person playing. What we care about more is latency
Mhm.
and stability of the connection, that we can hear each other. The quality of the connection at sufficiently low latencies is important. This is the question I got asked for years and years and years, even before the pandemic. Musicians calling, be like, hey, I want to jam with my friends. And it's like, when are you going to fix latency? It's like, yeah, that's not going to happen, because latency. I really love this graphic because it shows really well that latency is a lot longer than we think. Can you see that okay?
Yeah,
The
it
sort of
looks
light
great.
bouncing.
Mhm. Yeah.
So that's just between the Earth and the Moon. And the Moon is not that far away if you think about celestial bodies. It's very close to
Mm.
us. But even that light takes that long to get there. If you imagine being Michael Collins, who was flying the I forget what number it was, the spaceship that went to the moon.
Mhm.
I forgot the name of it right now.
Yeah.
And he was talking back to Earth while waiting for Buzz and Neil to pick them up. And so he'd be like, "Hey, what's going on? Wait. Oh, yeah, I'm good. Everything's good here. Thanks. How's it with you?
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
yep,
not
great,
like.
thanks." And there's that delay that
Yeah.
was real. You can't make that smaller. You just can't make it smaller. So we cannot fix latency. And so even around the Earth, say like between Australia and us, there's going to be at least 100 milliseconds of light latency. That's unavoidable. We can't make it go away until we break the speed of light or time travel. And I like to say is, when we've got time travel happening, I'm out of here. I'm going to the future to see what it's like.
Well, we have just shattered any kind of hopes for many musicians. The future will bring some magical solutions to that problem. And yes,
Mm,
purely based on the laws of physics, it is not going
yeah.
to change. Mm.
And yeah, I mean, also, if the moon has got latency, what about Mars? Mars has got that, it's an elliptical orbit. And on a good day or on a good part of the year, Mars is going to have a 3-minute latency. And on a bad day, it's going to be really far away. And then, of course, there's going to be some points when the sun is between us and we'll have zero radio signal. So there's the things,
So,
latency is
so then
an interesting thing.
Earth-based musicians will laugh and say, "Oh, this is nothing what we have to put up with."
Exactly. There's a friend of Angela was one of the first people. They had this great Hawaii space exploration program where they would a group of Earth astronauts went to live in this simulated space station in Hawaii, and even then, inside the space station, they put an artificial delay of 20 minutes so that they could see psychologically what it was like to be distanced. And he said it was this very disconcerting, and you felt really isolated,
Yeah.
and you couldn't call your parents or anything.
I think the pop culture is misleading because when you watch sci-fi movies, there is always that immediate Earth-like
Right?
communication with no latency. So obviously, yeah, there is no connection between
Yeah.
Hollywood movies and reality, but that's a separate
Yeah.
separate topic.
Well, yeah, a good one is The Martian that they did with the
Okay,
Matt
yeah,
Damon
yeah.
film. That book, that guy really knew what he was talking about. So
Yeah.
it is there. But yeah, generally, definitely I agree. Science fiction has got a lot to blame for it.
Yeah.
So, and there's a reason why low latency is important for us. We, for millennia as humans and as mammals and as organic beings, there's only a certain distance where we can hear things from. Sound just sort of stops after a while, unless you've got like a big bang of a volcano. Apparently they heard that for long distances. But generally, if you can hear something, then you think it's near. And then we use sound as a way of communicating, mostly at short distances. Although, of course, I shouldn't say that. There's many cases when we use sound for long distances, like whistling in the Canary Islands, for example, but across hills. But generally, for music, we could speak more about music rather than communication. Human music developed for low latency sound. So when I clap, you'd clap at the same time. We would perceive that as being the same time. And that concept of perception is really important. Because now that now we're choosing, I don't know if we would say, well, we will choose again in the future. We haven't been choosing the last year for the reasons that we talked about, wanting to work internationally. There's also migration for many reasons that creates us to be in different places. Tourism and nomadic lifestyles, aside from pandemics, why we might want to overcome these latencies. And of course, as we've all known, most importantly, we've had to stay where we are and want to work with other people. But it's so the other thing we know so well now is that we wanted to communicate. We've been in our rooms, in our homes, and it is a global phenomenon that we've wanted to communicate. I can't count the number of video calls that I've made in the last year. I think I've met more people online in the last year than I met in person the year before.
Yeah.
We've really embraced this ease of communication. We love it. It's so central to who we are.
Yeah, it's an attitude shift. People are so much more open to working and communicating remotely now, I feel, and musicians as well.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Just had a very quick, just to talk about music. Back in 2019, I gave a performance of a network piece of two pianos, where I was in Trondheim in Norway and another pianist in Rotterdam. And this is just, I'll just hopefully if you hear the audio, once the audio hears, you hear that. I'll just let you listen to that for a little bit. You'll hear two pianos, but it sounds like one.
Mm-hmm.
Do you hear that?
Yep.
was happening there, so I've got myself there in Trondheim, and the pianist in Rotterdam has the same score. And I have a piano, a program that's running in Python that's listening to what we're playing and using machine learning to see, oh, are we playing the same thing at the same time? And we've got a score that we're kind of more or less synchronized on. And the score says, okay, play this as you feel like it, but as the computer detects that you're playing at the same time, it will advance to the next section in the score, and then go through a composition that way. And that was you're seeing the score react, and they had the console sort of just printing out what it was detecting. What I like about this is that we use technology to play together over the internet. So the reason I put the slide up here is this is what we heard before the pandemic. Musicians being, we can't play over the internet. It's not made for it. And so I clearly think that there's so much potential and beautiful opportunities. We can use technology to help us, not just streaming technology, but also conducting. There's great ways of using conducting to work together. A lot of choir conductors found that the last year. Digital scores, click tracks. There's many ways that we can work this way. So
it's a fascinating discussion, because it shows us that we can establish new ways of musicality and new ways of performing and listening to one another, and with a little bit of machine learning, even new ways of composition. So it is an exciting breaking of the new ground.
Yeah, and we've just started. This is the beginning of, which is what it's so wonderful about teaching. I'm seeing students for whom the internet has been a part of their being since they were born, and like myself, and perhaps you, I'm not sure how old anybody is these days but
I've been not using the internet until I was probably, I guess, maybe in my very early 20s.
Yeah, so we're
Yeah.
about the same generation. So yeah, and so I remember a life before and life after.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
those who now don't have a life before, I'm really excited to see what art forms will come from this, as we're seeing all across the board. So yeah, so we will play music together over the internet. The next, where is it? Here. So given that we have latency, the reason it interrupts our ability to communicate is just because we're used to saying, hi, I'm going to give you some information and I'm going to expect it back. And, we've just evolved over time for this to become a flow, give and take, call and response. So if there's any delay in that, your brain starts thinking, oh, they're overthinking, or do they not like what I said? Or, did I say it well, or did I need to say it in another way? We start questioning how are we communicating. So latency, there's very good reasons why latency is disruptive. And of course in music, how can you align each other? I'll get into that a little bit more. Also very important to I think remember is that latency isn't just network latency. There's
Not
so
one
many
type.
latencies.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that those first two, or the first three, are technical, and they're sort of new, these technological latencies, but biological, neurological, emotional, and cognitive latencies, they've been with us since day one, since humans were evolved. So there's been latencies, there's been microseconds or milliseconds of latencies, but we've come to feel that it's not latent. We've come to feel that it's zero latency.
So
That's sort of
just wanted to say, for people who are only listening to us, not watching, just wanted to say that the first hardware related were hardware latency, software latency, and network latency.
yeah. So there are new latencies that I believe that over time, with generations of humans, we will begin to feel that these are native to us as much as biological or neurological latency. So
And
So,
maybe that term latency will be a lot more understood and a lot more commonly used, because it is a fairly specialized term, or has been at least up until now, when unless you were dealing with music software, either recording or performance oriented software, you wouldn't necessarily even know what the term referred to. So perhaps uh, the new normal, as it is being called,
mhm,
will mean that people absorb this word into their vocabulary, and it will become universally, or almost universally, understood.
yeah, I think so. Uh, Another thing that interrupts communication is mediation, and by that I mean digital mediation. So again, if you compare, standing in front of each other, having a conversation, we get all the sensorial knowledge that we've evolved to be able to tell, situation in context. We're over the internet, and all of that context is stripped away, and we're relying on our assumptions. We're relying on trust. We're relying on other elements, sort of digging into our brain, going, okay, I see before me a 2D representation of a person. I'm just going to assume that this is a real human being. I'm not talking to, just moving pixels. And we're fabricating all of these communications. It's really fascinating if you think about it on a psychological level. So music is really disrupted by this as well, because if you imagine playing in a band, you've got people next to you. You're always looking. There's all these cues, that I'm going to nod my head. I'm going to move my body. I'm going to move towards you. We don't have this when we're remote, so it's really easy to get lost. We have to find other ways of synchronizing.
Yeah, that non-verbal communication is harder to intercept and observe. However, I do see a lot of ideas discussing what could be the next opportunity to develop more sophisticated ways for people to get more nonverbal cues, and not just musicians, but also people who are on Zoom calls and are unable to have the same level of experience as face to face. So perhaps it's just a matter of time before there will be more technologies helping us to get some kind of non-verbal cues and non-musical cues from one another.
Mm. Yeah. Uh, but seems a little bit out of date now. But if you go back and read about network music performance or network music, all of these documents say you have to get latency down as low as possible, or we can't play music together. And I just emphatically disagree with that. And so I think that the new technology now, we've seen, like, okay, we can work with latency as it is, and that the research is that's coming forward is not what can't we do, but what can we do. So, like, as you said, latency becoming something that is, a normal thing for us. So one of the other properties of the network, so we've got latency and we've got the mediated presence, or the digital way that we are being broadcast to each other, but also the fact that we're multi-located. So we've got multiple locations. You're in your location in Australia, and I'm here in Spain. There's different acoustics,
Mhm.
different microphones. So we're coming together with merging acoustic properties, which is an opportunity, musical opportunities, to be able to use that for timbral purposes, for example.
Yeah,
And then,
absolutely. I see this as a huge benefit, and one of the things that drew me to that area, which is that multi-authorial approach, which is also connected to being multi-located, but you're just getting that in, not just the input, the musical input of your collaborator, but also their studio sound, their equipment, their instruments.
yeah,
All of that is being absorbed into the project, and that's the fascinating aspect of online collaboration.
yeah, right, absolutely. And for me also, multi-authorial means there's multiple perspectives, which in this world of, we're seeking diversity, we're seeking, to be inclusive. This is really important. So, I know Australia, for example, I lived there. But if I didn't, or if I were talking to somewhere I haven't been, for example, say Ethiopia is one of my places that I want to visit because I love the food. But if I talk, and I've had opportunities to meet online with some people in Ethiopia, I start feeling a connection, a certain interest of the locality, of interest of the culture. This act of communicating bonds us. So if we joined in a call from, say, somebody in Tokyo right now, suddenly now we're making a new kind of space starts to exist as well, and one that for them is a different space, because now they're in their home in Tokyo talking to Australia and Spain, and you're in Spain talking to Australia and Tokyo, and I'm in Spain talking to Australia and Tokyo, and these are different spaces, and somehow now they're all valid, and none of us is the most correct place. And if we were to do a broadcast of that, say a TV person called up and said, hey, I want to broadcast your talk, which one do you use? You have to make a fourth space again. Now you've got, so I think this is really fascinating, that it's not quite something that we talk about yet, but will become more conversation.
Yes, and it can become even more complex by adding someone who would be responsible for curating all those inputs in a kind of sense of mixing them and making those decisions as to what gets priority, what gets lesser priority, and what the final outcome is for the listeners. And of course, that's the I guess overlapping or interconnected space between studio-based work and live performance-based networked approach, because there's often that mixing person who is really like a creative director in a way, where they make those decisions, what is being heard by the audience. So that's an interesting perspective to inject into the collaboration, that there is another non-musician or non-performer, you could say, who often would make those decisions, especially non-performer in the live context, because in the studio context it could be one of the performers who is taking the mixing as another additional task, of course.
Yeah. No, you must see this a lot in, non-real-time collaboration, when you hand over tracks to somebody to be mastered or mixed in some way, and then, they're adding another element of their personality and their desires onto your work. It's a really interesting way to work.
Absolutely.
So, given that these are the core properties of music, just to go speaking about music, without these things, music does not exist. It is noise. It's one definition. There's many. This is the one I'll use here.
Yep.
And given that, then we have, for example, many opportunities, but these are four that I particularly like to sort of touch on them. The one I really love is this concept of post-vertical harmony. If you think of traditional music performance, say a Bach ensemble, a string quartet, and then was like, playing together. They're sitting in a tight group and they're super synchronized. You can't do that on the internet. So the harmony is, you have to think like, okay, how do we have harmony when I don't know exactly when that next note's going to come? It's a very interesting problem. And to demonstrate that, here's a Bach, just a 3-part piece. You can hear that synchronized. It's so that's coming in 3 parts synchronized. Now, if you're on the other side of the internet, say they might come in like this. So it still sounds like music, but it's not synchronized, and one of the lovely things is our ears are still going to make it music because that's what we're good at. And then maybe on the other side, there's three people here, it's going to sound like this because the synchronizations come in different timings. So somebody's always going to come later. I'm always going to come first. And that's what I mean about being multi-authorial as well. And you've got like three musicians, each of them hearing three different things. Which of them is the right piece of music? We don't know.
And which one would be broadcast to the audience? That's another interesting
Right.
question as well. Yeah.
Exactly. No, I would imagine, a proper network music performance platform would be one where you could choose the synchronization, as you listen. You could say, I want to hear it from different perspectives.
It's a
Yeah.
great idea, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. And also one of the other things we sort of touched on before is being able to have these different rooms merge as well. One example, in Scotland, there's this big cave. I think it's got one of the longest reverbs in the world. Imagine going there and playing a live concert with, another reverb in another cave. You could start mixing these cave reverbs. Or there's a great person in Perth who I believe, I can't remember his name, unfortunately. He has about 9 pianos in his house, and they're all prepared pianos. Those pianos are not going to the Sydney Opera House. That would be a lot of money to get them all out, and nobody wants to risk moving these pianos. So, prior to network music performance, you'd have to go to his house to have a music performance. But now he could be a collaborative performance with all those pianos. That's one great thing that I love about that. And then this section here about the post-digital experience, to me, this is the most fun of all. So I'm digitized right now. My voice is going into the microphone. My camera is digitizing my image. We're reproducing it fairly accurately, but there's no obligation to do that. I could put filters. I could be an avatar. I could project myself into 3D space. There's so many things that we can do. I mean, a lot of people now usually put video backgrounds and they use green screens. This is all part of that digital experience where what is reality? Why reproduce this at all? We can have a lot of scope for creativity there.
I guess the big question is for many people, I would imagine, which experience is satisfactory and which isn't. And I guess it is very subjective anyway. Some people might appreciate the original Bach piece only, and some other people might see beauty in a brand new musical experience of two of the other variants that you have played. Um, it's like being those problems that you have mentioned with latency are not just reserved to the networked world, because anyone who has been to a big stadium concert remembers possibly that there's so many zones created by different speaker systems, and if you are sitting in the wrong place, you will be hearing the speakers from the front and in front of you and behind of you, and you might get very imperfect experience because those speakers will not play the same thing at the same time. So that latency that we are talking about has been around us for a very long time now, but now I think it's being understood by people at a very kind of private level, because musicians now witness this when they have to or want to work online. But yes, and what you are saying now is also interesting because it's about this whole context of changing reality and taking it as a correct experience.
Yeah. That is a comparison to the stadium experience is really accurate, exactly. And in just that memory taking you back to, you're hearing the reflections and the echoes out of sync, and how much I like that, but then how much some people don't.
Absolutely, it's very subjective. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, some people do want this accuracy. They'll go out and spend $1,000 on like a gold cable or something to get perfect, audiophile experience. When the others, it's like, well, if the music's good, I'm happy on a cassette tape.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's so subjective, and imperfections now, like the cassettes and vinyl resurgence, show us that we actually went back to appreciating imperfections. And you mentioned how imperfections are embraced by the audience in the context of networked live performance, whereas they wouldn't be as forgiving when it comes to the recording experience. But yeah, it is very interesting how the imperfections can be appreciated in certain contexts.
Um, and then just the last thing to point out on something that happens with network music performance is that we are performing together, so we are moving in time uh, with each other. And of course, musicians, we have many cultural norms that we carry with us, depending on who you are. If you're, say you're a big band and you're the saxophone player in a jazz big band, you have a certain expectations of you, how you perform, versus say if you are improvising tabla player, or you're performing the in the gamelan. We all have certain expectations and performance behaviors and relationships that we've learned according to that cultural, according to that group that we're belonging to. And so they all share the fact that so Satinda and Caroline, her two philosophers I admire and have learned a lot from, that firstly that the music is very much about the body. That's something that we know. It causes us to move. It's involuntary, and that being in tune with each other means that the body will experience flow when we're in tune. This flow from Csikszentmihalyi, I think, was who really developed the idea of flow being when we feel like we're moving through time together, we experience a type of bonding that is then cyclical and reinforcing about us wanting to continue to work together. So music is it's reinforcing, and it's reinforced by us finding this flow, which you would have seen with the recording with those musicians that I shared with you. That was a process that they developed from rehearsing. If you saw the first rehearsals, they wouldn't have been in that flow. They really had practice for it. And the second one about needing vital information. This was inspiring to me to develop electronic scores. So to me, vital information is what happens when I need to know where I am, so I don't lose synchronization with the musician who I don't have all the information from. Where can I go to get that information? And of course, we use that in scores as musicians or conductors. Perhaps we can have a clock, to synchronize with. Those things are really important.
Yeah, so it is about deciding what is vital and what
Yeah,
is uh, negotiable or optional.
yeah. And deciding on a what constitutes a first beat for us. So, when I say, okay, we're going to do this phrase, we'll come back and, we're going to, for the next 3 to 5 minutes, we're going to elaborate on this, but at some point we have to synchronize back in with each other, or else we're just playing noise and not listening to each other. And so we also need to, as you say, the word negotiate is great, and negotiate what are those three synchronization points. So it's very
Mm.
musical. Yeah,
Uh,
musicians, we're good at this stuff.
yes, exactly. That's why so many musicians might be, uh, well, perhaps inexperienced with network collaboration, but they, like even the video you were showing me the other day, is a great example how they found the common musical context, and from the audience point of view, it was all extremely enjoyable.
Yeah,
Mm.
I think I'm almost, yeah, that's the last thing I have here. Just the ongoing research. There's certainly a lot of aesthetic work to be discovered still. I think with acoustics, there's going to be a huge amount of research done. If you think about codecs, audio codecs, a lot of them are made to exclude information. What if you made a codec that was the opposite, to exclude voice information, so you just heard each other's noises? I think there's a lot of fun to be had yet with this encoding.
Well, that's a great slide in terms of what I was going to bring up as one of the concluding remarks or questions for you is, what do you think the future might hold? And that's perhaps one way to addressing this question, that there might be some very unorthodox technologies that exclude things that perhaps many of us have been uh, requesting as vital information. And now, in a world that you framed as post-digital, maybe we can agree that certain things are actually non-vital, and we can perform music together without them. So that's a very brave and interesting idea.
It's
Mm.
it's it, it's not me at all that's making these statements. It's the world saying, we have to change. Change is happening. Change is, we must go with it. Yeah.
And speaking of change, Rebecca, what in your experience has been the most significant change? If you not even just think about last year of COVID-19, but more broadly speaking, just looking at your own journey in that field and thinking, what were the main what has changed over the last, say, 5 years? How are you looking at those developments and evolutions?
I think there's two strong currents. One is that there's a huge population that has gone, okay, I guess we're going to explore more of this remote collaboration thing. And then there's another who's been like, I don't want this. I never wanted it. I'm not happy about it. I'm going back to working offline, which is great. There's no reason why the world has to change all at once, and why it should completely change. I'm not absolutely not against also playing together offline. I have a piano. I like to hang out and sing with friends. It's not like I do everything online also. But
Yeah,
the
it's a very valid point, because it's not about rejecting the face-to-face work at all.
yeah,
It's about embracing other options for all types of reasons that we have discussed today. There is so many benefits of embracing this way of working, and it doesn't mean that we have to stop working with people face to face, of course.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I cannot wait to travel again, and it's been a year and a half since almost 2 years since I was home to Australasia and New Zealand. So, I mean, certainly a need we have to be in certain locations, and that's not going to go away. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we have relationships, we have families, and memories of places, and hopes for new places.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that will not go
Yeah.
away.
Mm. And I've been doing a nice asynchronous project as well all through this pandemic. A year ago, I sent a friend, I made a 16-second piece of music, just an idea of music, and sent her just the last 3 seconds. I said, if you continue this, take this 3 seconds and make another 16 seconds. So now we have 10 seconds of her music, and then we keep doing it. And I've got about 30 musicians now. We've been making this big long piece of sort of overlapping music, and just everyone's taken a week or 2 weeks just to do that. And it's a really beautiful way of connecting asynchronously as well. So I really enjoy non-real-time performance.
And have you established any new creative partnerships through that project, finding new musicians or meeting new people?
Oh my God, yes, that's been what's
Mm.
great. Just people sending it all around the world to be the next person to do their piece, and it's been really, really special.
Yeah, because that's another thing which is very social and doesn't have to include a discussion about technology. But to me, that's a very big benefit of working with remote music collaboration, that you meet new people. And
Yeah,
often, I was often very touched by the generosity of strangers, musical generosity, when people who you sometimes wouldn't even know their name, you just worked with them on a project online, and they would be so generous with their time and skills. And uh, yeah, it was heartwarming and very encouraging to continue working like that.
yeah. No, it does give back for sure. And a lot of people being time constrained, when we were younger, sure, we could go out to a concert venue 3 or 4 times a week, and that's just not practical anymore. So it's nice to be able to keep the social context up as well, without, we don't have to be isolated anymore, which is nice, even in
Mm,
spite of, yeah.
absolutely. Do you have any ways of exploring the social networking aspect of networked music yourself, or do you rely on existing contacts primarily?
Oh, it's absolutely about sharing contacts across, it's this first and second and third connections, constantly seeking, you know, input and new people to work with for sure. Yeah.
Hmm.
It's an ever expanding expanse. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a couple of great conferences that have been really helpful to one thing that could be, can be disheartening if you sort of start doing research, and, any researcher will know this feeling. You're like, am I the only one doing this? And then you start, gathering all the research and the papers, and you say, well, I'm doing it a bit differently. But then to go to a conference and to have a communication, face to face with people who are, or face to face, at least in this context, with people who are thinking along the same lines as yourself. There are a couple of those, and that's been really fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Although I have to say, being at and speaking at many academic conferences before COVID about online music collaboration, I still found that it was a fairly underexplored topic. That's why I was
Mm.
so uh, happy to meet someone like you who has the same research interest, and
Likewise.
and especially when it comes to not just kind of a collaboration that bypasses modern technologies. Because I've noticed in the past many musicians were, kind of exchanging files, sending stems to one another, and using maybe Dropbox or something like that. But they were very unaware of uh, technological developments in that field. Um, Whereas perhaps now the big push came from people wanting to continue to perform live last year, despite of the lockdowns and limitations with going
Mm.
out and meeting new people. So I think now many technologies that you've mentioned, even the open source technologies, are now becoming more popular. But what was heart warming again was that many of them were kind of at the brink of extinction last before the pandemic, and now they
Yes.
reemerged or got an injection of fresh interest, and many of them are developed by volunteers just to provide coding and input, for example. So that's really a fascinating outcome of the last year at least. Mm.
Yeah. It's quite a ride. So it'd be good to see how things pan out the next couple of years. Yeah. But
Yeah,
I feel this will keep growing. Yeah.
I think so. Just even seeing what is happening in Australia, like how we can have a period of fairly normal life, and then within 3 days, the situation can change, and we are now under a new lockdown because more COVID cases have been discovered very unexpectedly or very suddenly. So, yes, I think this is going to impact on our, I think, desire to learn those technologies and be equipped. But I also agree that it doesn't have to be related to COVID. It can have so many other benefits that people can get from working on musical projects with the remote music collaboration
Mm.
software or hardware.
Yeah,
Um,
so many.
mm, Rebecca, just thinking of making some concluding remarks and perhaps uh, saying where people can find out more about you or your research or your work in general.
Two places would be latencynative.com, and then I have all my papers are on ResearchGate. So my LinkedIn has got info as well. I keep that
Mhm.
sort of active.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
those links are already in the show notes
Oh,
for these
fantastic.
episodes.
Great.
But if there is any other, we can explore adding them later on as well. So I just wanted to say that it was great to get your perspective on this field. It's been a very valuable and also educational discussion. So wanted to thank you for your time and your input, and let's see what the future will bring.
Oh yeah, no, there's so much more to talk about. It's just the beginning for sure. Yeah,
Mm,
we'll speak again.
absolutely. So thank
Thank
you
you,
very
Martin.
much. Thank you, Rebecca. Bye. And thank you everyone for watching this stream. We will be now wrapping it up. And if you have any other questions, let us know in the comments on your favorite social media channel. So thanks for watching and stay tuned for next episodes of Music Collaboration Online.